Hi folks, my name is Charles and I'm the host of Go-to-Market Hackers, the show where we go inside the minds of revenue architects creating systems that deliver winning outcomes. So I'm a SaaS founder with close to 15 years of experience scaling GTM teams, and what really interests me is understanding how the best go-to-market teams are leveraging AI to scale their business in innovative ways. And so this is what this podcast is about. It's about interviewing GTM engineers, system thinkers, and revenue architects that are deploying AI internally to create these outstanding results. And today's guest is my friend, Stephen Bates, who is the founder of Cabot Insights, a GTM engineering company that works with high growth startups, and that is based out of Dubai. Stephen, really great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on. We're excited to have you. And I wanted to have you because you always have really unique perspectives to share on LinkedIn. And one of the things you're also quite focused on is ICP definition, which is one of the main things you need to make sure you get right before building anything else, like the foundational block. So hopefully we'll get into that. But before we do, would love to kind of learn more about your background, who you are, Cabot Insights, what's your kind of unique insights, and then we can dive into some of the cool stuff you've been doing.
Amazing. Yeah, appreciate the intro. Thanks for having me on. I know you've done a quick intro, but to add a bit more context to it, the last time I did an intro on a podcast, I looked back and I realized I spent way too long introducing myself. So I want to make this introduction relevant to like what we're talking about and like the world of go-to-market and the startup ecosystem. So I was checking the years, but about 11 years ago, I actually left Ireland to go to San Francisco because at the time everybody was getting into like tech, and tech was the place to be. So I said an opportunity came up to go to San Fran. Went to San Fran, joined a early stage startup in the middle of Silicon Valley, and I had never ever done business development. I've never ever done like outbound sales or anything like that, but I wiggled my way in and I convinced the hiring manager to hire me. So learned like loads. I was the BDR selling into enterprise, did that for a year and probably had more fun than I actually worked. But that's the whole purpose of doing those trips. Came back to Ireland, joined Salesforce, did like a BDR as like 2.5 years in Dublin, moved to London and joined the enterprise corporate sales team where we were doing high velocity sales to enterprise companies in the UK. Then I got fed up with that and I hated the corporate life, and COVID came and I decided to join a hypergrowth unicorn startup that I thought was going to solve the problems of the corporate world. But after 6 months, 10% of the company got made redundant. That was the best thing that had happened, because since then I've been working for myself. And at that point I got involved in the startup ecosystem and I started working on accelerators in Dublin and like immersing myself in that whole world of startups, go to market. But basically taking everything that I had learned over the last 8 years, which sometimes a lot of people take for granted, the amount of learnings that you actually pick up that without you even realizing the amount of value that is actually inside your head. So started to work with early stage startups, but then February of last year moved to Dubai, and now I run a go-to-market engineering agency based here in Dubai. So happy to explain more about that.
Makes sense. So if I summarize, you have both the experience of like the huge, massive tech companies like Salesforce that are publicly traded. You've probably experienced the pains of being inside the belly of the beast, right? Those huge organizations with a lot of processes and red tape. But then you've also experienced the ups and downs of the high growth startups that expand quickly and contract quickly as well. And so now you're able to accompany startup and larger companies in that process too, hopefully with fewer of the contractions and more of the expansions. But yeah, definitely, I think that's one of the themes of this podcast, which is, there's so much going on right now in the world of AI. And I talk to go-to-market teams, on a weekly basis, and everybody's trying different things. Some things are working, some things are not. There's also a little bit of GTM porn where people talk about these super complex workflows, but sometimes, a super complex workflows doesn't necessarily work in terms of ROI, right?
Yeah.
And so I like to get into the meat of it. What have people done? What has worked? What hasn't worked? And just kind of open up the hood of the engine to kind of look into the details. And because you have this unique insight and perspective, it's great to have you on to be able to kind of demystify that and help founders understand how to leverage AI to the best. So again, curious, I guess maybe first of all about your overall process at Cabot Insights. what do you think of when you start, working with these high growth startups? What are the areas that you look for? What are the questions you ask? And basically, how do you start incorporating AI in a way that is effective and scalable?
Sure. Happy to go through that. I think just something you said there about like the, I don't know, you call it LinkedIn porn or LinkedIn
Yeah, like GTM porn or
GTM porn.
yeah.
It's so funny. I have like I've just, because I post quite a bit. I spend more time than probably other people on LinkedIn. But just the amount of bullshit posts about like workflows and the N8N complexities and getting rid of a full SDR team and saving $50,000 in 2 weeks. And even last week, someone posted, we've generated 5,073 leads for our clients over the last like month or something crazy. But anyway, side point. So my advice to people, call out their bullshit. Getting back into it. So for those listening, Cabot Insights, where we are an agency that helps businesses leverage AI automation to basically make your sales teams more efficient and ultimately bring in more leads. We do use Clay as our core tool to run our operations, our orchestration, and because I've been there, I've lived it, I've seen what works and what doesn't work, and I've been in the trenches myself, so I have a unique perspective when we're working with clients, and that human element is like super important when you're also considering using AI and automation, which we can talk about. But to answer your question, I think if we look at like my approach, and again, this is probably more of a general view also in terms of like how startups should incorporate AI in go-to-market. I think fundamentally, number one, if you're not thinking about AI, I'd be surprised if there's that many companies who aren't, or you don't believe in it, or you said we're going to do it in the next couple of months, or you're sort of leaving it to the wayside. You're already behind, way behind. Your competitors are doing it. If you don't incorporate it, believe in it, and make it a core strategy of your go-to-market, you will cease to exist. That's my view. In terms of like framework,
If yeah, do you mind if I jump in? It's
yeah,
interesting because so the folks that I talk to, I think they're beyond the point where they don't believe it can work, but it's more about, at least the folks that I talk to, it's more about they don't know where to start. And so,
yeah,
the stories I hear is they hire, a young, GTM engineer, or they hire somebody who's supposed to help, but that person is super technical and doesn't necessarily have the full picture of the business. And so, and I guess it might work if the startup is pretty small and they're trying out kind of these specific initiatives around, getting some leads with this specific project or this campaign, et cetera. But then when you get to a certain scale, it's harder to have these smaller projects and silos when, as you were at Salesforce, when you have your CRM, you have all this data, and whatever you're doing in one part of the org can impact the rest. So, yeah, I think what I've seen is a lot of not necessarily reluctance to use AI, but reluctant, not mainly like questions about how to leverage it best, how to start, how to implement it with success. Does that make sense? And
yeah,
maybe you're seeing some of that as well.
sure, yeah, 100%. I think that the start of last year there was this bit of a panic. It felt like when I was speaking with prospects and having discovery calls, we have to do something with AI, or our board says we have to do something with AI. So that rushed approach to implementing AI typically will cause issues down the line. So my biggest thing, which is hard, is like having patience as part of the process. Start crawl before you can run. I think that initial spike of excitement and everybody talking about AI and you have to do AI, I think is probably slowly like coming back down. I think this year things might level out a small bit. But in terms of like practically speaking, I don't think I'm going to say anything here that is like revolutionary. And I'm sure a lot of people know this already, but it's true. And I think you might have seen some of the publications from like MIT and McKinsey saying that 95% of AI initiatives aren't generating ROI, which is it's a big statement. But then when you actually look into it deeper, and when you look at like a study that's done at such a broad data set, you're looking at multiple different industries, different sizes, different type of people inside organizations, different maturity, they're selling different products. I think as if I was in a startup's founder's shoes, I would look at your industry as a subset and see what other companies are doing, what other your competition are doing, and make it very specific to your world rather than taking a general view of like everybody's doing this go-to-market strategy with N8N, so we should do it. It's like, no, you take a step back and figure out like what is it about your business and your industry that we can solve that is super, super relevant to you. And I think that as a first step is something to consider.
That makes sense. I like that. So you slow them down a bit before accelerating.
Yeah, which is very hard with early stage startups. Everything has to be done now. Pipeline has to come in. We have to show results. We have to move fast. But the ability to have patience and realize that it takes time will ultimately pay its rewards down the line, because you'll be the one that put the steps and the processes and the strategy in place to make it happen. But on top of that, like there has to be leadership buy-in, which, you know, I'm sure everybody knows is like if the CEO or the co-founders aren't bought in or like mandated. So you would have seen this year, last year, a lot of big companies, their CEOs sent out these mandates. Everybody must use AI on your day-to-day. And if you don't, basically leave the business. A lot of big companies did that. So when that comes down, and people have like different perspectives on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But once that is trickling down from the top down to the bottom, naturally things are going to move fast. People are going to get more interested. People are going to experiment. People are going to try out new things. And then on top of that, like having the CEO or the board's buy-in, again, sounds very simple, but pick one area that you want to focus on, prove it works, and then you start to expand on top of that. And that's the way I approach it with the clients that I work with. Is we spend 3 months going through a specific problem, whether that's email infrastructure or whether that's manual processes or lead flow or ICP scoring. We pick one of those and we spend a lot of time in it, making sure it works, testing it, reiterating it, ensuring that we're showing progress.
I guess one question I have for you, and it kind of piggybacks off a bunch of things you said, is to what extent do people bring you in and the first thing they want is leads, right? Oh, we want more leads, we want more leads, we want more clients. And I think the truth is, I think there is a reason why you talked about GTM porn. We talked about how you read a post last week or something where this one guy said he had 6,000 leads come in. So there's obviously exaggeration, but there's also some truth to the fact that there are some really interesting new data points that you can capture now that you have LLMs, right? Using awesome technique and all sorts of things. You can capture a lot of publicly available data that might be sitting in these, niche databases and suddenly leverage it in a super personalized ways, in ways you couldn't before. And like a lot of stuff has been done already, but there's still opportunities there. So I do think it makes sense. But then the second question is back to kind of what you were saying, do you have to also backpedal a little bit? Because in some cases, they don't even have an infrastructure. Like I was talking with somebody last week and they wanted to set something up like that. And I said, great, I'm just curious, what is your stack? We walked through the stack and they basically only had HubSpot. And they said, we could just start, sending out emails with HubSpot. And I had to kind of back up a little bit and say, well, we first have to discuss the infrastructure. That's not, a cold outbound infrastructure. So to what extent, I guess you have to, and maybe this goes back to like slowing down before you accelerate. You have to kind of reposition the scope and the conversation around, okay, let's have the fundamentals that are well, defined, including, by the way, what you talked about, which is ICP, like knowing exactly, who you should target, what's your unique, selling proposition, nailing that ICP and the and capturing the signals of the ICP that shows that they're, interested and willing to, or at least in the buying phase of the journey. Is that more important? Yeah, just curious to get your thoughts on that. And I feel like we're talking a lot about this point, but it's an interesting one in terms of startups forcing you down a path which might not make sense or might be premature, basically.
Look, I think that's also, it comes like on the founder startup side. If you are working with an agency or working with yourself and the agency or the person, this comes back to, I think, the original point that you made about companies hiring a GTM engineer and it's like super technical. If the company or the agency that you're working with is not pushing back and challenging what you're recommending or giving advice and giving perspective and saying, hey, I understand what you're saying here and I understand the urgency, but actually that's not the right way to do it. Let me show you how to do it. And that comes from experience. That comes from being able to manage a sales cycle effectively. And that comes from being able to like not say yes to every demand that your customer makes. But unfortunately, because there's so many go-to-market agencies out there and everybody's a Clay go-to-market engineer, naturally what's going to happen is you're going to talk to a technical guy that you might have seen on LinkedIn and they'll say, yes, no problem, we'll do it. So that's also coming back to like, you should do your research on the agency. You should like leave the calls with the agency or a GTM specialist to be like, shit, like that's like I never ever thought about that, and he's definitely right. So that's why, and that comes down to trust, right? So that's a slight caveat to your question.
Yeah, totally.
Now I've sort of forgot the talk track. What was the
Well,
question
well,
again?
well, well. I guess no. I think you answered it. You answered correctly, and it was gonna lead me to another slightly different topic, which is related to being able to challenge the folks you work with. I think makes sense. Walking them through. I think you said crawl, walk, run. Walking them through that process, and if they want to start, running before they've even, have a clean CRM data or before they have a sharp ICP and those type of things, then
Yeah.
it's just have to walk them through what they need. And then I guess then the follow-up question is, once they have everything in place, once you start, scaling up the engine, what is your mindset in terms of helping them structure this internally and kind of teaching them how to fish? So are you guys, when you come in, do you set up the infrastructure, run with them for a couple months, then hand it over to them? Or I'm just curious about the mindset there, because again, on my end, it's very different. Like I work with startups and I help them kind of. Sometimes I bring in an agency to help, but oftentimes it's about building the team internally. But I do think that, first of all, it's hard to find, the team that can be set up as quickly as an agency, right? An agency has a bunch of different skill sets in that agency that can quickly ramp up and launch campaigns and set up the infrastructure. So I guess I'm curious in terms of timeline. Once, that customer has listened to you, has started implementing the foundations, refining the ICP, you're scaling the engine. What is the mindset in terms of helping them through that transition and scaling it? And when do you guys take a step back, or do you guys stay involved? Curious about that as well.
But the way there's, I think 80% of my clients and the work that I've done, we do retainers and we stay. We're an extended part of the team and we chat every day on
Got it.
Slack. Is it the most scalable way to grow my agency right now? Probably not, but it works, and I'm happy with the work that we're doing and the projects and the relationships and the engagements that we have. I like getting as embedded into the business. I like solving problems. I like being part of, getting from point A to point B. So 80% we stay on, we work with them. 20% is we build and we hand it over. We record Loom videos in terms of this is what we built, this is how you use it. So it depends on the client, but different options.
That makes sense. I guess, yeah, if you're super embedded in the team and you're extension of the team, then they don't try to replace you because you guys are delivering value. And then I'm sure that you're continuously improving the systems, the workflows, and basically the engine. And then basically it grows along with you guys and within the customer, basically.
Exactly. So it works for now. It's definitely more
Makes
bespoke.
sense.
It's a more bespoke model versus, hey, just come in and run lead gen for us, and 80%
Right.
of the process is automated.
Makes sense. So, with all that in mind, I'm curious to dive into some of the stuff that you've done. We talked a lot about ICP, and I know that's one of your pet peeves, is really making sure that the companies that you work with have a fundamental understanding of their ICP, of the signals that their ICP might be conveying, and how do you capture those signals and those type of things. So I'd love to understand kind of again, diving into something more specific,
Yeah.
an example maybe that you can share about a successful client that you've deployed with, and what were the takeaways? What was the impact? Those type of things.
Yeah, happy to jump into that. I think just to finish off the last topic of discussion, like I think looking back, when I think about where startups get things wrong as it relates to like AI and go to market and automation, is assuming that, or thinking that AI is like a magic pill and that you implement it and it fixes everything. And it's just not the case whatsoever. And I think LinkedIn maybe suggests or makes people feel that way, is, oh, if we just implement this workflow, it's going to solve the problems. Because if you do that without fixing the data foundations and the data quality and cleaning your CRM and verifying contacts and to ensure that your data is AI ready, you're going to, again, face issues as you kind of move forward in the rollout. So the data element, but also the human element is always going to be a part of successful rollouts. So I just think it's important to mention that.
Makes sense. So you're anti-hype, anti-AI GTM hype, which I like. I like
Big
a lot.
time, big time. I have a goal this year of just calling out more bullshit on LinkedIn. So my comments this year are going to be a bit more direct.
Love that.
But going back to your question about like examples and projects that we worked on, we can go through some stuff and happy to share. I think one of the biggest, and this ties into like what we're going to discuss and what we're going to walk through, is for me, right? So if I again thinking back, even as a founder, as a CEO, but also as a BDR and as an AE, back then, being able to segment and analyze your account list and your TAM and your accounts that you want to target, the time it took to do research and create segments, either you never did it, or you did it and it took like weeks and weeks of work to like review a website and a person and everything like that. So AI and go to market and tools like Clay and other tools that are emerging is basically you're allowing companies and organizations to build go to market for precision. So what companies are able to do is get hyper personalized and build micro segments of target lists that, as I said, weren't previously, you weren't able to do it, or if you did, it took you weeks and it took lots of headcount. I'll give you a very quick example. We're working on a project at the moment where we're doing ICP scoring across the TAM of a company. And they've had, this is no word of a lie, this is no temp porn. They had 4 people in the data team check if 500 accounts were B2B tech and had over 1,000 employees. It took them 4 weeks to do that. When I met the lady for a coffee, I was like, okay, by the way, let me just share and show you what Clay can do. So she couldn't believe it. And like, they're in the go-to-market space. They provide sort of go-to-market services.
Wow, crazy.
So that's just one example. So like the efficiency gains there and all that kind of stuff. But also with AI and capabilities, when you're able to segment and enrich, your personalization and your outreach and your offers and your call to actions become super more relevant. So like previously what you would do is, okay, we're going to target everybody over 200 employees. But what if the company was 190 employees and they hired 6 sales reps in the last month? The VP of sales just got promoted and they changed a keyword on their website that is super interesting for your business. So like you've just gotten rid of a potential target just because you said employee count is 200. So like the days of segmenting based on like 2 to 3 criteria is just over and it doesn't work anymore. So I think what we'll show you here is like ways to get around that and what's possible. So I'll share my screen.
I had a question related to, Jordan Crawford talks a lot about vertical SaaS and how he believes in vertical SaaS versus horizontal. And I guess I was just going to segue, into that topic just really briefly, because you talk about ICP. I think one of the mistakes that a lot of these SaaS companies do is they want to go super wide. And so they'll have, 2 or 3 A's on one vertical and 2 and 3 A's on another. And then they ask, the head of the BDR team to be able to start, campaigns across, a TAM of 10,000 accounts and a massive TAM. And then you kind of lose a little bit of that finesse or that, the insights that you get when you're a little bit more focused. Do you agree with that? What's your perspective on that? And typically the startups that you work with, are they like horizontal SaaS that, like a Salesforce that sell across tons of different industries? Are they more verticalized? And how do you deal with the situations where they're super broad in terms of ICP?
Again, a mix. A majority will be horizontal. It just requires a bit more work in the preparation and the documentation and the questions to get familiar with like each of the different personas in those verticals. It just adds probably a bit more work and a bit more effort in doing research and building agents to do better outputs if we're doing like messaging and things like that. So look, I agree. I think the more narrowed down you can get on a buyer and a persona, their pain points, how they buy, the better your output, the better your messaging, the better your ebook or your event or your webinar is going to be, or better your ad is going to be. So of course, the more narrow you can get, I think the more success you're going to see.
Makes sense. Cool. Let's dive in, Bernard. You were about to share your screen.
Yeah. So back in August, I did a webinar with HubSpot for startups, and similar to what we're talking about today, the audience there was similar to what is probably listening to this, like founders, early stage, but also like a bit more like scale up as well. But the problem, which we've just talked about for the last like 15, 20 minutes, is how do you find the top 20% in the market that may drive 80% of the revenue? And going back to the problem that we've looked at is, okay, previously you'd send the same message templated to 10,000 people. Back when that used to work, 30% might reply, 15% of those are interested, and it was all, wow, this works and amazing. And obviously times have changed. So what we're doing with Clay is building a Clay-powered scoring logic, which we'll show, where the ability to enrich account data automatically and immediately as leads come into the system. We're building custom scoring models specific to businesses and their world and their use case. And we're integrating all this into CRM. So a lot of companies listening to this or founders like should resonate with the problems that typically come with trying to identify who in your TAM you should reach out. So this is a real life project that we worked on. I'm going to show you just the flow of the scoring framework, the data points, and then I'm going to jump into Clay, and then I'll jump into another tool or two. The ultimate goal here for this specific client, and this could be relevant not just for, AEs, it could be for BDRs, it could be for AEs, it could be just for the founders themselves or the RevOps team to help them distribute accounts across, global distributed teams if they have reps globally, for example. But what we're doing is we've built a scoring framework out of 100 points. We've split the two into fit and intent. We've added classifications in terms of what to do, the action that takes place depending on the tier that the lead got. And here are the signals that we've identified. So as I'm going through these, I think about what it would take you as a human or a team to go find this information. So what we're doing is we're building, some of them are custom agents, which I'll show, and then some of them are just native enrichments within Clay. So where we wanted to check first if it was a remote first company, is the person a decision maker, what the employee count is there a fit between the industry and the services that we provide, do they have a globally distributed team? Then we move on to, are they hiring in new countries where they don't have somebody present? Have they received funding, number of open roles? How many of those open roles have been open longer than 45 days? What's the headcount growth over 6 months? Have they launched any new products or expanded into new markets, and any recent M&A activity? Imagine if I asked you to go do that for one lead, how long it might take you to get that information accurately.
Yeah, it's crazy.
15, 20 minutes maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is the first step, and this is what my advice to founders listening is. I think about what's relevant for you and what are the signals and the data points that make a lead or a company interesting. And this takes time, by the way. Like this wasn't just a simple questionnaire that the founder or the head of growth filled out. This took nearly 2 to 3 weeks to get to a point where they were happy. We built a score. So again, taking the time to speak to your customers, if you have to, speak to the CEO, speak to the product team, speak to the reps, get all the feedback, use AI to analyze your closed won, what trends and commonalities are there. So once you have those signals filled, you can start to obviously assign scoring weighting against the points. After the scoring, we move into, right, what do we want to happen to that lead? So an inbound lead comes in through HubSpot. We go through the scoring flow in Clay. If the score is higher than 30, we send a Slack notification to the rep. If it's lower than 30, we put it into a nurture campaign. And in both situations, we create a pre-call qualification document for the AE or the BDR to open up when they do outreach or they jump on a call. So all these data points that we did research on now is populated into a document. Instead of like populating Sorry, go.
No, sorry. So instead of populating the CRM, and then I'll ask my question.
because through the discussions, they sort of said a lot of this information is going to change quite regularly, and we don't need it in the CRM at all times. So for current open roles, that might change each week, and we don't want to waste enrichments to run all the time for this specific signal. So I think we selected 3 of these where we sent back into HubSpot, and the rest of them we just put into a coded document that is dated to say, okay, here was the data at this point in time, and I'll show you what that looks like.
Yes. So yeah, the question that I had was, I remember again when I was involved in this initiative with the marketing ops team, there were also signals related to, specific articles that they read on our blog, or specific white papers that they downloaded, and specific CTAs that they took on the website, right? We had a ROI calculator. Did they use it? Were you tracking those type of things as well? And then when you like, how do you define a lead in this case? Is this somebody who would also like put their email in a form to be contacted? Or is it literally somebody who has these intent signals, but to do cold outreach to, like, not cold, I guess maybe it's semi-warm if they engage with your brand. But yeah, curious if you could define that a little bit more and kind of explain a bit the process more.
So they actually have a separate HubSpot score that tracks the activity online. So website or download, how many times they visited. And there was a HubSpot consultant specifically within the business that had built that. So they actually have a Clay score on the HubSpot record. They have a Clay score, and then they have, I forget what they call it, HubSpot score. So
Got it.
they're actually kept separate, and that's the way that the client wanted it.
And so these are not necessarily leads that have expressed formal interest by entering
These
their email into any form.
These leads are
Oh, these leads are okay.
they've downloaded an ebook, they filled out a
Got it.
contact form, they have registered for a webinar, they have
Got it.
engaged in some sort of other lead magnet where their details are collected. So
Got it.
this
Okay, that
works
makes sense.
really well when there's like a high volume of leads coming in. However, the same logic applies for outbound. Like all the enrichments and data points that we have built can be applied to a brand new list of leads or a brand new list of accounts, so that when we're doing outbound, we know the top 20% who we want to target. So what's the point of sending an email to someone who scored 5 points versus somebody who has 65 or 80 points?
100%.
So this, do you want to, funny enough, I did this in Claude 10 minutes before the call, because
Looks great. It looks beautiful.
I had it in a Google Doc that like was obviously not as nice as this. So Claude put this together, which I'm spending more and
Looks
more
fantastic. There
time.
you go. Now you have an ebook that you can add to your website.
Exactly. Okay, so jumping into Clay, I don't know, Charles. Like, I'm going to assume that everybody knows Clay listening to this.
Totally. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Basically, as a first step, we're pulling data in from a webhook through HubSpot. So once the form is filled, goes to HubSpot and automatically comes into Clay. We go through a pre-ICP scoring enrichment, and this is just checking job title, finding their LinkedIn profile, getting their phone number, email, and then this is the folder or the file that has the ICP scoring workflow. So what happens is all the data comes in, it goes through some initial level enrichment, and then it's brought into this scoring workflow. So basically what is happening here is where you see the highlighted columns is related to the signal that we have established as the first step of the process. So this table, if you're looking at it and you're quite new to Clay, you might be looking at this to say, holy shit, like this is a lot of information, but we can break it down and focus on the first or the most important parts. What we're doing, as I said, is we're either building custom agents or we're using native integrations. And I'll show you some examples of what this looked like. So this first enrichment or intent piece that we're looking at, we're using open AI in this case, and within Clay, obviously it gives you access to lots of different LLMs depending on the use case and depending on the job that you want it to complete. So you can imagine, a remote work policy. there's obviously different layers to ultimately getting to that answer. When I think about it, there's loads of different data points that will get you to that answer, depending on, do they have people in different locations? Is it specifically said on the website? Do their job postings specifically say we are remote first, hybrid? So there's all these like signals online that as a human, you'd have to go check, unless it specifically says on their website, hey, we're a remote first company, which it obviously isn't always the case. So what we're doing is we're prompting the agent to be very specific and giving it a job. And in this specific example, we're saying, you're an agent tasked with comprehensively gathering, summarizing information from a company's website to identify remote work policies and cultural indicators. Your role is to systematically extract all relevant information and help determine.
Sure. No, this is super interesting.
So
love that you're diving into the details.
Cool. So what we're telling it to do, we're giving it very clear instructions as to where it needs to go. We're telling it to go to the career job sections. We're telling it to go to about us culture pages. We're telling it to go to team and people pages, news, press releases, company blogs, benefits, perk pages. We have, contact office information, and then also look for keywords and phrases that you might find on the website. So once you start to stack these on top of each other, you can imagine like the level of detail that the agent goes to and the different levels that it looks at. We even get it to look at any leadership statements. So on top of that, we're giving it steps as to like how to, approach the job that it needs to do. So we're telling it, start with the homepage for the overview, navigate, document, note any issues, collect evidence, telling it exactly what it needs to do, examine at least 6 to 8 different sources, focus on quality, and then the output should be in JSON, be as accurate as possible. So that, question, is it a remote first work company or not? So the output of that is, yes, it's in office, it's hybrid, it's in office, or it's remote first. And the great thing about Clay, and I'm sure everybody knows this, but this is a huge selling point for when I am showing this to a prospect, because data, the trust in the data and the trust in the output, and what if it's wrong, and where did they get the information? It's a huge selling point that I've actually only realized in the last 6 months how important it is. So when I'm saying to a client on a demo, for example, I'm saying like this specific prompt that we went through, here's exactly the summary and the information as to why it got to that answer. So if your reps are unsure, or there's people in the business that say like, where did that come from? Very, very quickly you can come in here and say, okay, actually this job spec said remote first. This actually said you need to be in the office. On Indeed, it talked about working from home. Glassdoor talked about how great it is that it's a remote first company. Not no human. If you ask a human to first of all do the research and come up with a summary as to why it came up with the answer, that's probably a couple of days work. But now we're doing
100%.
it within a couple of seconds.
With more mistakes than the LLM probably.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that's like spending a bit more detail on that specific point, right?
Can I ask, by the way, this is like a small point, but I see those icons like green, red, and orange within that. Like, is that convey like the level of confidence, or like the red square there on the left-hand side?
Yeah. So it relates to there is a confidence tab here.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have medium. The red one, I think, is very low. So there's
Makes sense. Yeah.
obviously there's steps that you could do here. So going back to my point earlier on, having the human in the loop, we could build a conditional format to say, if confidence is very low on one of the signals, send that data to a new sheet where a human or person has to go in and validate whether it's information is right. And we do that quite a bit. If we can't find data, we can't find a website, we'll build a workflow where a human has to go in and check something.
Makes sense. Super helpful.
So then as we walk through, we go through the different data points. Sorry, I don't know, I'm after getting a cough since we've started this, but to show like some of the native enrichments within Clay. So we're looking at the employee count, but also amazing data here to show like what's the growth over 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Again, trying to actually get that data without a tool or AI is going to be very, very, very difficult. You can then obviously see trends across different time periods. If you want, I can go into like another prompt specifically to show like
Sure.
the
Yeah.
level
Yeah.
the level of detail. So, for this specific client, they don't want to sell to companies in blue collar or frontline industries. And again, being very specific. You're an agent tasked with determining if they operate in blue collar or frontline industries, and you must provide a short or strict classification based on the company's primary business activities. So again, going through the instructions, this is what you need to do. This is the classification criteria. Here's what a blue collar is. Here is what it's not. And going through like serious level of detail and how to output the answer. Don't include any explanation or reasoning or additional text outside the JSON response, because sometimes if you don't add that level of detail or information, it will come back with like way too much information. So depending on how you want the output to be structured, you need to obviously tell the agent to be very specific in like how it outputs it, because this can be used easily but also reviewed easily enough as well.
Yep. Makes sense. Super clear. This is a great example. It's interesting that you have to define in the prompt what a blue collar industry or a frontline industry is. I mean, I'd be curious if, because these LLMs are pretty smart. So I'd be curious if the accuracy of that response without that definition would be, just as good. Again, it's good to put guardrails anyways, but
Yeah,
yeah,
look,
curious.
I think for something like this, maybe we could have been a bit more flexible, but what's the
Right.
point when you can get better
Accuracy. Yeah.
answers and
Yeah.
better accuracy? So that's
Totally.
what we're always looking for. And that's what like I started my Clay journey 2 years ago, and back then like prompting obviously was very, very different to what it is now. So it's just like the natural evolution of like learning over time to realize we need to be way more detailed. Like the more detail that you can give it, it's just the better the result is going to be.
Totally. Yeah.
Um,
And by the way, in terms of the actual model you're using, are you guys testing out different models? I think you said you were using 4.1. Is there a reason for that one versus, some more recent models? And I guess maybe this was, or Furrow Mini. Got it.
so I'm actually not the best person to like ask as it relates to like the models and what ones to
Yeah.
use. My GTM engineers are the experts when it
Right.
gets to that level of detail. I try to like stay on top of it and keep up to date, but it just it changes so much. So
Yeah, yeah, totally. It changes so much. That makes sense. And 4.0 Mini is very efficient and
exactly.
has a great output. So I know a lot of people using 4.0 Mini for sure.
Formity does like a lot of great work. If we need better accuracy, we'll use a different model, but obviously it depends. The cost goes up. So this is also what, as
Totally.
part of the ROI modeling that we do with clients is, we might say, hey, let's put through, once we find the top 20% or identify, a group, let's put them through the higher tier of an agent to ensure that the data is more accurate. So like there's a subset of leads that might go through a lower AI agent in terms of the model, so the cost is more efficient. So depending, but
Yep.
Claude, if we're doing email generation, Claude is the winner for sure. Like we're creating some amazing personalized emails based on all this data that we have found and based on the lead that had come in and the context. It's incredible. Like for this specific client, the response rates are really, really high. Um, so that's been basically because of the ability of Claude.
That makes sense. So maybe we can talk a little bit, and I don't want to break the flow, so keep going, but at some point I do want to dive into, so what was the impact for that specific customer you were working with? I'm sure, I mean, if I were an AE in that, that company and I have a Slack notification giving me the score plus, pre-call prep notes, I mean, that's gold. I would be so excited. But yeah, curious after that, once you kind of finish the flow, to
Sure.
understand the impact and how people reacted and those type of things.
So yeah, just to finish up on this flow, basically the end outcome is this column here and this the scores that we've been talking through. And obviously the different actions take place depending on the score. But in all cases, what we're doing is we're sending the information that we got into their internal Coda system. And then we're also updating HubSpot, and then we're sending the Slack messages here. And what does that look like? In Coda here, we have all the different data points. I'm not going to go through into the detail, but we can see expansion news, product, the information. So as a rep, having this in front of you on a call not only increases the efficiency and the time saved, but the ability to ask the right questions, dig deeper on certain areas that are important to them. So the chances of converting and building more pipeline and closing more deals just increases.
And then you said, so the leads that are below that 30-point threshold, they're sent into basically just nurture. Do you still like, I'm sure there's a lot of things that even those nurture campaigns could do with that info, but I'm not sure if you were feeding any of those insights back into, a specific type of nurture campaign they should get into. Maybe that's too wacky, but there's so many insights from that, right?
Well, what we are actually testing, which goes back to what you're saying, what did we learn? So look, at the end of the day, there's always going to be outliers. A company that scores 5 in this specific industry and what the services that they sell, there might be no information online, but they just have this very unique requirement where they need to hire someone, and there's no data online to suggest that we could have found that information. That's always going to be the case. So what we're doing and what we're testing at the moment is we're actually sending emails to every score from 0 to 100, just to see is the scoring that we're actually creating coming back with at least 80% accuracy of like, okay, 80% of the leads got this score and they're coming back with a need or a requirement. Or are we seeing that, loads of companies who scored 5, 10, 15 are coming back? So that's literally just started a couple of weeks ago. And that's one way to test whether like the work that you're doing is accurate and it's actually adding value, Secondly, what's interesting, and it's very funny that you mentioned that about if you were an AE and you came into the job and you were like, wow, scores, pre-call qualification documents, the reps weren't using it. And I've been a rep, so I know exactly what happens. You get busy, the company's telling you to think about this new tech, new tool, this new workflow, but you always have to reinforce the message. Every week now, I have a call with the AEs once a week for 30 minutes, which wasn't part of the initial scope of work, but I said, it's going to strengthen the relationship, I'll do it. So I have a call with the weekly on the AEs and I say, what did you use this week? What was of value? Can you give me some feedback on some of the data? So now the reps are starting to message in Slack to say, hey, Stephen, this lead didn't go through properly, or hey, there was no data for one of the reps or for one of the leads. This call was good. This information is good. So that continuous feedback loop wasn't there at the start. And I was like, okay, how do I get it? So I've scheduled a call. I asked for their feedback and I walked them through the process. Hey guys, just to recap what this does. And I go through what I just showed you every couple of weeks to reinforce the message.
So I love that you are kind of mixing in non-scalable, so to speak, kind of human processes with like the AI processes. Because you could have also said, well, then we set up a workflow where we kind of look at the call recordings and then we track like keywords and like there's a crazy workflow you can do there. But just going back to the basics of having this, these calls with the reps and getting their firsthand, feedback is so powerful. So that's awesome. And I can see how that also forces them to make sure they're somewhat accountable because the
Yeah,
company's paying for this amazing service. And I could see like not using it immediately if I'm just, if the score is not necessarily super high and it's not like you have an inbound call right there and then, but it's still amazingly powerful to have as a tool. Now, the question is also like the format. Maybe, you and I know reps, they're not very, let's say, diligent. They're not lawyers that like to, read pages and pages of documents. So maybe it's about making it like super concise with, bullets and
exactly. But
so there's probably room for improvement. Yeah.
we went through that process. We were sending too much
Nice.
information to Coda. It was, even for me, when I opened up the page, I was like, this is way too much. We brought it down,
Right.
but then it wasn't enough. So like there has to be a feedback loop. And this comes into like the advice is like, if you're not hearing from the end users about like whether it's working or not, But I pushed that, by the way, like, because ultimately, if we get to a point without me asking those questions, it means that there's a risk of attrition. It means that there's a risk of a churn, and the relationship, you're like, I'm not providing the value that I said I was going to provide. So like, I was pushing having the weekly calls. I pushed getting the feedback. I was pushing the change. So like, agencies listening, it's not like, it's not on the company to always like come back with this like level of proactiveness. So the more proactive you can be and the more embedded you are within the company, the more sticky you're going to eventually be. And
Totally.
that's what you want.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's kind of you're explaining how come you're so embedded because you go the extra mile of not just like shipping a specific playbook or an infrastructure. You're like, all right, we've delivered this. How does it impact your team? How is your team using it? What is the how does it, change on a day-to-day the lives of the AEs and the VP sales or whatever it is? How can you refine it and improve it? Because it's constantly about iterating as well, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I agree that that's how you also deliver true value by, just closing that loop and iterating over time.
100%.
Very cool. This was a great example, and I love that it wasn't just, "Hey, here's a cold outbound playbook that we've done." It's much more important. And I also want to, you mentioned at the beginning, you said, "Hey, like, oftentimes we help about how do we get, more leads for our customers." But, what this playbook shows is how do you get better leads? How do you ensure
Exactly.
that the team is more efficient and focusing their energy on the right kind of leads? And I think a lot of people forget about that. And I remember some of the top closers as companies that I've worked for and that were reporting to me, they weren't necessarily, you know, taking hundreds of calls per week, but they were super, some people hated them because they would say, I don't want that lead. I don't want that lead. I like literally they would turn down just they had this kind of intrinsic understanding of the ICP and they're like, nope, not a good fit. I don't want
Yeah.
and sometimes just kind of like focusing and rejecting certain leads. Again, there's always a limit to that. And I like the fact that you're also, emailing all of those specific folks that have shown intent just to make sure you're not making mistakes. But I think being able to focus and narrow down your ICP is what allows you to scale faster and get better results. So it makes a lot of sense. Stephen, maybe before we close this out, what is your kind of maybe number one recommendation for founders that are looking to implement AI? We talked a lot about GTM porn, and I think you kept it really real during this conversation. Any other kind of parting recommendations or suggestions for a founder thinking about how to inject AI into their GTM?
I think like number one is like, be curious. Like the example that I might give, which I don't know if this, like, over the last week or two, I've like, because when I think about Claude Code, for example, when I looked at Claude
Right.
Code, I was like, what the hell? Like I've never code. I don't know what code is. I don't know
Yeah.
anything about it. I spent the last 2 weeks like watching videos, doing like high level research, following people on YouTube, looking at people on LinkedIn, following trends, conversations. And in 2 weeks, I already know 100 times more than I did 2 weeks ago. So it's definitely worth a founder doing that baseline level research into the space, the people, watch some YouTube videos, listen to a podcast, find some people on LinkedIn who are engaging and talk about it, and ask for like recommendations and introductions. Then when you enter the call, you'll be in a much stronger position to challenge what somebody is saying, to ask a deeper question that you might not have thought about because you learned it in the last 2 weeks. So that's probably my advice. Like, research, be
Love it.
curious about the space. It will make your positioning stronger. It will make your discovery stronger. And I think ultimately it will impact the project better.
Love it. I think that's great advice. And it's great advice for everybody because even when it within their, GTM orgs, like on the sales side, on the marketing side, also pushing their teams to just get more comfortable with these tools, learning about it. I mean, you're a clay magician, your team seems to be super strong. So, without the expectation of being able to create these super sophisticated tables with all these variables, but just at least understanding the dynamics and what you can do with these tools and how
Exactly.
how far you can push them is super powerful. Awesome. Stephen, what maybe also like in the show notes, I'll drop if you have, really good YouTube channels or YouTube videos that you've liked on these topics or folks that you follow, I'll maybe drop them in the show notes. where can people find you? I mean, again, I follow your content a lot on LinkedIn. Are you anywhere else? And yeah, basically just want to make sure the audience can get in touch with you if necessary.
I'm in Dubai, so come by, come by to Dubai. But yeah, no, 90% of my time is on LinkedIn. I was trying to do some YouTube podcast stuff last year, but it fell to the wayside. So yeah, LinkedIn, you'll find me, Stephen Bates, AI, go to market. I'll pop up. So please connect. I always enjoy having these conversations. Another key belief of mine is always take the call. So when somebody reaches out and says, hey, can we meet for coffee? Just have a conversation. The amount of times that I'm able to connect a deal or an intro or a podcast based on me just taking a call and it leading to something else is like incredible. And I can attribute, lots of revenue to the fact that I took a call, I met someone. So take the call.
Amazing. Love the advice. Stephen, thanks again for hopping on the pod. It was great to have you on. And until next time, I'm sure we'll chat some more about these awesome workflows you're working on. Great to connect.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.